The brave warriors of the Empire of the Sun have approached the gates of their enemy's castle. They are ready to storm it to their death, stopping at nothing. There are thousands of them, armed, brave, loyal to their emperor. There is only one goal for them: the capture of the new kingdom. The shouts at the gates, demanding that they open the gates, surrender and lay down their arms, have not been successful. The castle walls are adamant, high, and seemingly nothing will come of it. Wooden and high doors cannot be destroyed by spears and arrows. It remains only to storm it. Lightning fast, arrows and spears of the enemy began to fly at the warriors of the Empire of the Sun. They were prepared for this outcome. The warriors were dying, but their fighting spirit could not be broken. Swinging away from the enemy's guns, they await further command. The dark-haired, golden-eyed Master Sergeant gives the command to raise the ladders and begin storming the castle. There is no other way out. The way into the castle lies only through them. The certainty of victory is evident in his eyes. There is no turning back, only victory. That is the goal and the motivation in every warrior of the Empire of the Sun. As he fights off arrows and spears, he encourages his warriors and raises their morale. No surrender, not one step back. In the name of the Emperor and the Empire of the Sun. Long and sharp swords ready for blood, ready for the battle that is about to begin. Wooden and sturdy ladders are set to storm the enemy's castle. The brave and courageous warriors of the Empire of the Sun begin to storm the castle, but the enemy has no intention of letting them pass. The commander-in-chief of the opponents gives orders to destroy the enemies, leaving them with no thought for life. Defend with all the forces they have the castle. The sergeant calls upon all his warriors to destroy all the unbelievers and the disobedient. One by one they climb the tall wooden ladders, fighting off the enemy's spears and arrows. The ladders fly down, but the fighting spirit of the warriors of the Empire of the Sun cannot be broken. They are made to win. Suddenly the Master Sergeant looks up and sees a blinding, bright red light. There is a sense of consternation in his golden eyes. He was not prepared for such a thing. The mysterious weapon is getting closer and closer to him. How to fight it off, how to deal with it, the sergeant thinks mentally. A red fireball flying at breakneck speed is heading straight for him. The speed makes it even bigger, and there seems to be no escape from it. It blinds his eyes so much that he can't even open them. Dorami watches in awe as he sits on a chair, nervously smoking a cigarette. He doesn't move. He is confident in the victory of his loyal and brave warriors of the Empire of the Sun. Looking off into the distance, where flaming red orbs fly one after another, it was not clear in Doromit's eyes if he knew of the existence of the mages. The company captain realizes that the resistance is much stronger than he thought. He had not expected the enemy to be so heavily armed and prepared. But still, his confidence will not be shattered by anything. Sergeant Dana, a dark-haired, tall girl, company sergeant, standing next to Doromit, also realizes that the enemy's mages are not so simple. In her voice, you can hear a note of uncertainty and a drop of fear. She was not prepared for this turn of events either. Doromit, with complete confidence and unwavering calmness, is certain that this will all be over soon, predicting that there is not much left, only 3 or 4 attacks on the castle, and it will fall. But it's all spoiled by those mages, with their weapons. Sergeant Bucky, who is still sitting on the chair, suddenly and unplanned, approaches Doromit with very burning and angry eyes. Doromit is puzzled by what is happening, and at the same time guessing where this is going. Silence. Without asking permission from his superior, Sergeant Bucky confronts Doromit with the fact, stating that he is ready to go to the battlefield and help his soldiers in the battle, because he has been waiting for this for so long, watching what is happening. Truly, an ordinary brave warrior would not sit on the sidelines, but would fight shoulder to shoulder with his brothers. Doromit is very displeased, shouting after him, asking him what he's doing, where he's going. But he doesn't get an answer, doesn't even try to stop him. Sergeant Boki has unrivaled authority and respect amongst everyone. He's a legend, and for battle is life. He can't be changed. He is a brave and courageous warrior who will not sit back and idle. Dana laughed. No one is surprised by this behavior of Sergeant Boki. Well, he made his choice, and, as usual, the same one without listening to anyone else. On the battlefield, the battle between the warriors of the Sun Empire and the magician continues. One by one, red fireballs fly at the Sun Empire warriors. The mysterious weapon seems to be impossible to defeat. The mages, without stopping for a second, conjure up their weapons in the form of red glowing fireballs and launch them down, destroying everything and everyone in their path. The battle turns into a confrontation between the human warriors and the weapons of the mages. What will help them in this battle, and how do they counter it? Standing with dozens of warriors at the very top of their castle, the commander-in-chief of the enemy empire of the sun cautiously approaches the mage who helped them in this battle with the enemy and addresses him with great reverence. The mage is surprisingly calm. The commander-in-chief thanks, tilting his head slightly, thus showing his loyalty and respect for the mage, clearly and without verbosity. After all, thanks to him they could not be destroyed. The proud mage, without making eye contact with the commander-in-chief, simply nods slowly back at him. But as strange as it sounds, the mage explains to him that gratitude is unnecessary, whether it's modesty, perhaps something else. Indeed, he has a number of reasons for being involved in this battle. The commander-in-chief is puzzled. Suddenly, the expression on the modest and calm mage's face changes in a second. The face is covered with a frenzied anger, a hatred. The color of his face changes from pale pink to purple bloody, and the reason for this comes from his mouth. He grinds his teeth and words come out saying that these people from the Sun Empire destroyed their kingdom. This is revenge. The enemy commander-in-chief would have understood everything even without those words. After all, the magician's face spoke for itself. He quietly and carefully began to report to him on the progress of this battle. The enemy warriors are doing their best, not relaxing for a second. The look on his scarred face is determined to win, full of anger and hatred no less than the mage's. In his head, only thoughts of victory. A plan of action is playing out. But at the same time, some incomprehensible fear slips through. He hears some sound. The commander-in-chief doesn't understand what's going on, what the sound is. Looking around, he sees a picture that does not please him at all, but only brings him to a stupor. Before his eyes, one of the opponents, a warrior of the Empire of the Sun, is approaching the battlefield with frantic speed and insolence. The stomping of his black boots is so audible, overshadowing all other sounds coming from the battlefield. His speed is such that he seems to have some sort of supernatural ability. It seems that the current time has stopped. Everyone is frozen and only his silhouette is moving. The enemy warriors are at a loss as to what is really happening. It's a surprise to them. Suddenly, the pavement under his feet begins to crack. It seems that he weighs tens of tons, and it feels like he's about to take off. The enemy warriors froze with their mouths open. Suddenly, sharply, and at breakneck speed, the Sun Empire warrior pushing off the ground takes off. What's going on, they think. But no one finds an answer. He flies like a hawk, like a thunderbolt descending upon them. In his right hand, he holds a sword of gold with a black leather hilt. Standing in the middle of the warriors, the mage and the commander-in-chief froze in anticipation. Fear lingers in their facial expressions. The mage's face had turned pale, and the commander-in-chief seemed to have turned blue. The blood in their veins had clearly begun to flow more slowly. The sweat from the commander-in-chief's face began to flow down his face. There was only one single question in his mind. Who was that insolent young man? How dare he dare? What he wants, well, and of course, How he did it. Silence. Pause. The world seems to stop. There is silence and expectation. A warrior of the Empire of the Sun lands on his right knee like a true, loyal warrior who knows what he wants. There are a great many enemy warriors around. Opposite him are the mage and the commander-in-chief. He finally lifts his blonde head. The blue eyes are filled with anger and at the same time clarity of mind. He has a very determined attitude. His gaze is so piercing that it inspires fear in everyone. He is confident in his abilities and knows for sure that nothing will stop him or stand in his way. The quiet, sepulchral silence finally ceases. A dozen enemy warriors stand in a wall in front of this mysterious and unpredictable warrior of the Empire of the Sun. The mage and the commander-in-chief move away. The tense and quiet atmosphere is broken by a confident and slightly rough voice. The voice is as calm as the warrior himself. From his lips come words of the mercy of his emperor who is willing to grant a pardon. As he continues his speeches, the brave, warlike and unrelenting young man, aka the sergeant named Baki, offers to surrender his opponents, giving them their lives. But the condition does not please them. After all, it is necessary to bow down to the Empire of the Sun, which means to live on under their banner and worship their emperor. After these words of Sergeant Baki, that brave warrior, unable to bear the tension, the mage appears. His anger knows no bounds. He shouts incomprehensible words, blaming the Sun Empire for the evil done to his kingdom. A red fireball appears in his hand, blinding everything around him. His eyes became unbearably blinding with their white light. How dare he suggest such a thing? How dare he even show up here? What despicable arrogance! The words came out. Anger knows no bounds. His left hand, with a bright ball of fire in the palm of his hand, begins to swing upward. It seems that this scene has been going on for ages. Everyone is watching in awe. Only Sergeant Baki is calm. Nothing can surprise him anymore. Absolutely no movements of the opponents. He was too young, but at the same time he was experienced beyond his years. The ferocious mage continues his actions. He swings the flaming fireball, trying to finally finish off Sergeant Baki, but he fails. Standing next to the mage, the commander-in-chief watches silently. He's confident that the mage will pull through and this will be over. Suddenly and quickly this confrontation ends. Sergeant Baki, with a single movement of his sharp ball, makes an instant impact, knocking off the mage's head. Everyone around this action is horrified, shocked, and bewildered. There was not even the slightest hint of a confrontation between the two. Sergeant Baki is calm and untouchable. He says in a quiet voice that they were given a chance. They should have taken it, and things would have ended very differently. It's their choice, their decision. They should have thought about it, not jumped into battle with such confidence in their abilities. The reaction of the enemy warriors is justified. Without a single doubt, they are ready to destroy the Sun Empire warrior. He has taken the life of their powerful weapon, the mage. Ready to attack, they raise up their swords and begin to move towards Sergeant Baki. Revenge completely blinds them. There is so much noise that you can't even hear what's going on outside the castle walls. The enemy warriors are determined to destroy the insolent young man. They are in the majority and have no doubts about their victory over him. It's time to finally end this and avenge their mage. A calm Sergeant Baki raises his sword. He says something and his sword becomes even brighter. It glows and in the center appears the rune of flame. Its light becomes so bright that it dazzles everything around it, as if a cloudy, gray, cloudy day had turned into a sunny one. Sergeant Baki is a brave warrior of the Empire of the Sun. He did not doubt for a second that everything will be like this. After all, true warriors would fight the enemy to the last man. Swinging his sword, bright with light, he ignites it. Sparks fly everywhere, ready to burn everything in the neighborhood. Finally, the enemy warriors can't stand it any longer. Embittered by their hatred, they begin to attack Sergeant Baki. The battle begins, in which each side is sure of its victory. But who will win is still unknown. Sergeant Boki has a lot of skills. After all, he is a legend who has conquered many lands with his dedication to serving the Emperor. He has fought many battles. Many empires and kingdoms have bowed before him. The martial art of the flaming sword is Sergeant Boki's second skill. The untouchable Sergeant Boki, with his 2 feet on the strong concrete slab of the castle, destroys it in a split second. His power, unmatched by any other, it is powerful, mysterious, maddening, and beyond the power of anyone else in the world. The games of bright flames go on and on. The confrontation does not stop. The enemy warriors die one by one. There is no power equal to Sergeant Boki's. With a single swing of his flaming sword, he destroys everything around him at the speed of the wind, and the wind is no match for him. The enemy warriors don't stop for a second. They are ready to attack in the name of their kingdom and the Emperor. Rage and revenge breeds resistance. They will do anything to get rid of Sergeant Boki. Spears, arrows fly at him, but no weapon hits its target. Boki's strong hands strike one after another with his flaming sword. The scars on his hands speak of how many battles have been fought, how many wounds have been received. The art of sword-wielding seems to be in his blood from a young age. Clutching his flaming sword tightly with both hands, Sergeant Boki shows his skill to everyone. His sword is unstoppable. The glare from it seems to sweep across the entire castle. The number 1 skill of swordsmanship is martial arts. One by one, Boki throws out his fire sword skills and techniques, destroying anyone who tries to approach him. The new technique is the crescent moon slash. With a single swing, tilting his head to the ground, his sword draws a fiery circle around himself with it. You can't see his gaze. As if with his eyes closed, he continues the battle, intuitively sensing the approach of the enemy. The crescent moon slash destroys a dozen warriors in a second. What is this, if not magic? Flustered with fright, furious, the enemy commander-in-chief realizes that things are not going according to plan. He loses dozens of his loyal soldiers. With eyes like those of an innocent animal, he looks at Sergeant Boki. One thought slips into the commander-in-chief's mind about who he is, and then everything falls into place. He didn't see this coming at all. This is the legend of the West, the war hero, the world-famous Sergeant Boki. As Doramit continues to sit in his chair, he realizes, looking at the castle, that the mages have been destroyed, since no more red fireballs can be seen. All thanks to Sergeant Boki, he has completely figured it out. No doubt about it, it's business as usual. Satisfied and completely unemotional, Doramit rises from his chair with his hands behind his back. No one was surprised at the eventual outcome of this battle. It is not for nothing that they keep Sergeant Boki and feed his army of warriors. Doramit finally spits the cigarette out of his mouth, for he had continued to smoke throughout the battle, taking a few slow steps to the side. His gait is very majestic as well as confident. The broad-shouldered Doramit stands confidently before his warriors as he addresses them. In a full, manly, and gruff voice, he urges them to spare no life in the name of the Empire of the Sun and their Emperor. Dona is always by his side, accompanying him on his left arm. Hundreds of warriors, raising their swords to the sky, cheer for Doramit. In the name of the sun, they shout their slogans. Brave, courageous, and faithful, they are ready to march to their doom. It was the 98th year of the solar calendar. From the small group of like-minded warriors, more and more truly brave young men were gathering, ready to fight in unison. As the number of warriors increased, a new state in the east began to emerge, the Empire of the Sun. It was ready to wage wars across the continent to conquer and subjugate it. The military power of the Empire of the Sun was so strong that it was prepared to stop at nothing. Warriors went into battle knowing they could die. Their desire to enslave all infidels instilled fear in their enemies. It was the 116th year of the solar calendar. The wars continue unabated. One by one, nations surrendered their positions and submitted to the Empire of the Sun. Rumors of their majestic army spread across the continent. From that very day of formation of a small bunch of warriors, ready to become warlike and world-famous, in just 18 years, half of the entire continent has been conquered. The Empire of the Sun became a truly majestic and mighty power, and today, fighting the enemy, this became their sixth victory in the war. Sergeant Boki raised the flag on the enemy castle, showing everyone that the battle was over, victory for the Empire of the Sun. He saw no other outcome. All night passed. Dawn. The sun, slowly rising, illuminates the battlefield. Sergeant Boki looks into the distance and sees it ablaze with fire and flames. Smoke covers the entire sky. Sergeant Boki is tired but certainly pleased with himself. The motionless Sergeant Boki kept standing and staring at the battlefield for a long time. It was as if he was studying and replaying over and over again every step of the Sun Empire's warriors, their movements before they died. What other thoughts were still in his mind? After studying what was left of the carnage outside the castle walls, he began to look around him. A look of sadness and sympathy for his comrades was evident in his gaze. Too many warriors on both sides had died. The bodies of enemy warriors lay motionless by the dozens beside him. Boki realized that it was all his doing. There was a silence that was truly inexpressible, but the rumble of swords continued to ring in his ears. The commander-in-chief of the enemy warriors was nowhere to be seen. Casting a glance at his dead Sun Empire warriors, Sergeant Boki became even sadder. They lay motionless. Many he had known. Many he had been through previous wars with. He thought that he could have been in their shoes as well. Biting his bloody lips, he bowed his head. His eyes were covered by long blonde bangs. It was obvious that he was honoring the fallen warriors, paying tribute to them. They had fought shoulder to shoulder, protecting and covering each other. The peace and silence was suddenly broken by someone's voice. It was a small, short stature with huge eyes girl, Junior Sergeant Mint. She quickly ran with the news to Sergeant Boki. The enthusiastic look in her eyes clearly wanted to communicate something important. Flustered at the surprise, Sergeant Mint stopped, saluting Boki. She informed him that he had done a great job and that Doramite was looking for him, should return to him immediately. Standing with her, on her left side was a tall young man of slim build. This was Lance Sergeant Varrock. He continued her speech, informing her Captain Doramite had some important errand for him to run. Sergeant Boki was clearly displeased at these words. He gritted his teeth, pressed his lips together so tightly that they seemed to crack. Anger was setting in. The blood began to boil in his veins. There was some strange confrontation going on inside him. Standing with his back to the Lance Sergeants, he didn't make a sound, didn't even move. Standing so still that Mint and Varrock didn't know how to act. The confrontation between rage and calm was over. Calm had won, as always. Sergeant Boki took a deep breath and exhaled, calming his heartbeat. Finally, he looked back at the junior sergeant standing behind him. Without showing his sadness and displeasure, he understood everything and thanked them for a good battle. The junior NCOs contradicted him in one voice. Mint, with unusually expressive eyes full of admiration, exclaimed, saying that it was thanks to Sergeant Boki that they had won this battle with the enemy. He was the one who destroyed all the enemies and even all the mages, thus greatly embarrassing Sergeant Boki. After talking, the warriors, as if nothing had happened, began to discuss the battle. On a cheerful note, they even laughed, throwing out jokes regarding the way back. Mint suggested that they jump off the wall to get to Captain Doramite more quickly. Unexpectedly, they were attacked in the back. Who is it? With great anger, a man with a knife in his hand approached right at Boki, trying to wound him. Sergeant Boki's bright eyes didn't even have time to develop the face of the man attacking him, and the junior sergeants didn't even hear anything to alert them. Boki turning his gaze sharply over his right shoulder. He doesn't have time to coalesce and take any action against this insolent and sneaky enemy warrior. His piercing look of consternation speaks for itself. In a fraction of a second, the enemy, holding a knife with both hands, stabs Sergeant Boki in the side. A small man, in gray, wearing a hood over his head that hides his face. A hellish pain runs through the sergeant's body. He is in such a stupor that he does not know what to say or how to react. There are many scars on his body, but such a blow that he can't respond to is the first time he's been hit like this. Reacting quickly, Staff Sergeant Verok immediately jumps up and grabs the enemy by the throat. He tosses him in the air and throws him straight to the ground, piercing the stone pavement. A small knife flies out of the enemy's hand. Sergeant Verok looks his enemy in the eye, teeth gritted, choking him by the throat with a terrible hatred. He doesn't know who it is, he just wants to destroy it. Gradually, Sergeant Verok regains consciousness, but does not let go of the enemy. He's in shock. It's a child, a small child. In the background, Sergeant Mint, running up to Sergeant Boki, tries to help and see how he's feeling. The enemy child tries to break free and utters all sorts of horrible words about how he hates the entire empire of the sun. But Sergeant Verok doesn't listen to him and tries to finish the job he's already started. In the end, this is exactly what happens. The enemy child falls silent. His face turns pale and his body shows no signs of life. He destroyed it, no matter what. Junior Sergeant Verok, rising from the ground, informs Boki and Mint that the sneaky enemy has been hiding among the corpses, waiting for the right moment to attack. A sneaky and cunning act by the enemy's little warrior. It was over and there was silence again. Silence. Lance Sergeant Verok asks Boki how he is feeling. Sergeant Boki is at a loss as to how to react to the situation, whether he's ashamed or not. He closes his eyes for a moment and takes a deep breath and then exhales. Sweat drips off his face in droplets. He must be having these thoughts in his head about the fact that he managed to get hurt by some kid. Boki replies to Veroku that he's fine. The western border of the Empire of the Sun, the tall wooden gates as well as the high walls of the castle show his majesty. Sergeants Boki, Mint, and Verok have arrived from the battlefield. The base of the Falcon's Beak Battle Company is set up in the middle of the castle. A camp has been set up there. Dozens of tents are closely lined up side by side. The surviving warriors of the Sun Empire continue to arrive at the camp. Sergeant Boki appears to Captain Doramit about an errand he has to give him. As if nothing is wrong, without a hint of the wound he received within the walls of the enemy's castle. After saluting, he asks if he was looking for him. Captain Doramit, not giving in to his bad habits, smoking a cigarette. Without turning to Sergeant Boki, he pauses for a moment. Next, Doramit informs Boki that some rumors have reached him. Continuing his calm and monotone speech, he asks Boki how it was that an enemy child was able to wound and nearly kill the Western war hero himself. Turning to Sergeant Boki, Doramit's face showed displeasure as well as some contempt. He waited for an immediate response and an explanation of this situation. Then, without waiting for an answer, he asked another question if there was any knife point left in the body. The conversation continued to be very tense. Captain Doramit waited for a detailed explanation. Sergeant Boki began his excuse. He informed the captain that he had lost his vigilance and asked for his forgiveness for such an oversight. Captain Doramit expected such an explanation from Boki. He involuntarily closed his only eye, thus showing his displeasure. He respected Sergeant Boki and didn't want to hear anything more from him. Doramit exhaled, folding his hands in front of him with a cigarette in his mouth. Ordered Boki to immediately go get medical attention and reflect on what had happened within the walls of the enemy's castle. On Captain Doramit's desk lay a black leather folder with the coat of arms of the Empire of the Sun. He abruptly remembered something and went to it, holding out his hand. Captain Doramit took the folder in his hands and walked over to Sergeant Boki. Handing him the folder, he said that it contained very important information, and he needed to pass it on to him. After Sergeant Boki's squad had rested and cleaned up, they needed to immediately go to the Falcon Wing North Company's base with this important message. Staff Sergeant Boki bulged his bright eyes, clearly shocked at what he had heard. Captain Doramit proceeded to explain to him that the Emperor had ordered that one squad from each company be chosen to fight together, explaining that Sergeant Boki was from the Western Company of Falcon's Beak. So he and his men, the warriors of the squad, should go on this mission. Sergeant Boki, taking a black leather folder, began to ask Doramit questions. He was stunned at such words. What order, what joint operation could there be? There were only questions in his mind. But Captain Doramit continued and immediately spotted Boki's questions, answering him that this was a very secret assignment, the details of which even he did not know, and it was not worth asking him such questions. Squinting his eye, Captain Doramit suddenly became thoughtful. The silence of the two warriors was not broken by anything. Sergeant Boki continued to stand stiffly on the ground and waited for some explanation of the situation. Captain Doramit continued his speech, informing and encouraging Boki that this was a great chance for him to prove himself, for Boki had always wanted to become a special warrior of the Empire of the Sun. But that was clearly not enough for Sergeant Boki. Captain Doramit no longer intends to continue the conversation and tries to finally end it. After ordering Boki and his warriors to rest, he gave orders to depart in 3 days' time. Sergeant Boki calmed down and the surprise disappeared from his face. He accepted the order. Doramit also added that he should tell all the information to his members of the Falcon's Beak unit. Boki nodded in response to Captain Doramit, closing his eyes for a second. He was clearly unhappy with everything that was going on. What the Sun Emperor's secret mission was, he couldn't get out of his head. As was his custom, Sergeant Boki raised his hand and put it to his temple. Thus he saluted the elder, saying that he and his warriors would give their lives in the name of the Emperor and the entire Sun Empire. Boki left the captain. In the sky, the sun was already setting. The warriors went to their tents to rest after the hard battle, and the sergeant immediately went to his lodgings for the night. Insanely tired, with an inordinate number of questions that he had never received answers to from Captain Doramit. Carefully he places his weapon against the wall. He finally removes his heavy uniform to take a full breath. Will his sleep tonight be sound? Not likely. Thoughts will keep him awake for sleep. Continuing to undress, Sergeant Boki peels off his black t-shirt. Beneath it, white bandages are visible, bandaging the wound from that very child's blow so tightly that Boki is uncomfortable. He continues to slowly, calmly, pondering what is going on and clearly concerned about something, and throws off his armbands. Sergeant Boki's body is so disfigured that it is impossible to look at him without sadness. Over 100 scars cover his young body. He remembers the origin of each one, in what battle and under what circumstances they are received. Suddenly he casts his gaze elsewhere. There is hatred and anger and deep regret in his gaze. At the side of his room stood an open chest of very small size. Inside it was a child's toy in the shape of a green crocodile with an open mouth. There were ropes coming off of it. Clearly it was suspended. It was probably some kind of child's dagger sheath. Sergeant Boki, looking sadly and longingly at this chest, clutching his bandaged scar, speaks words of apology to his brother. Who is his brother? He abruptly, in a single motion, tears off the bloody bandages, raising his hand up. He is angry, and angry at himself. He feels guilty. The blood from the puncture wound in Sergeant Boki's side begins to bleed, but he doesn't show his pain in his face. Perhaps he doesn't feel it at all. He only feels his guilt. He continues to voice his thoughts aloud, apologizing to his brother for his weakness. He suddenly sticks his hand into the bleeding wound, trying to get the knife point that child left behind. He feels the hellish pain, mooing and moaning, but doesn't show it in his face. He punishes himself for something that happened in the distant past. He blames himself, and this guilt haunts his life. In front of his eyes, he constantly sees that picture on the wall of the enemy's castle. It shows the same child with frightened eyes, but at the same time filled with hatred for them, who continues to be strangled by Sergeant Varrock. He thinks, and says out loud, that perhaps that same boy was the same age as his brother. Clamping his eyes shut, he tries not to think about it, but he fails. He looks at his bloody hand. There is so much spilled blood on his hands, so many of his enemies he has taken the life of, and at the sight of the little boy he hesitates. And not for nothing, for he immediately remembered his brother. Sergeant Boki continued to stand staring at his bloody hands. The guilt never left him for a second. He could not resist it. It happened after every battle, but today's battle had absolutely knocked him out of his calories. Clenching and biting his lips to bloody, From continues to blame himself, considers himself a weak warrior, unworthy of anything or anyone in this world. Hatred has long captivated him. He's ready for something superpowered. And after the last battle, he realizes he is weak and not ready yet. The thoughts in his head won't let him rest. Sergeant Boki is a powerful and capable warrior, willing to do anything for... He keeps repeating one phrase. Pulling out the point of his knife with his bloody hand, he does not stop talking, apologizing several times to his younger brother named May. Blood continues to trickle down his mangled, scarred body, pouring out onto the floor, creating a huge puddle of scarlet blood. Weakening before his eyes, Staff Sergeant Boki leans on his flaming sword. He loses his strength, holding on with his left hand to the bleeding wound he received from the boy in the castle. Opening his pain-reddened eyes, he loudly utters words of rage. All the pain that his brother May had to suffer, he promises to repay 100-fold and take revenge. Suddenly he raises his head and his gaze falls on the flag of the Empire of the Sun. No one knows what he's up to. Imbued with hatred and anger for a long time, he has been hatching a plan alone. A plan of savage revenge. Revenge on the entire Empire of the Sun. His eyes burn with rage, unwittingly thinking that with that look he could burn everything around him. Sergeant Boki has a long journey ahead of him. A path of justice and equality. A path that will end all things. He will fulfill his promise, his duty, make things right and rid himself of guilt. He will rid himself of the entire Sun Empire. All we have to do is wait. Frosty morning. The icy snow prevents the soldiers of the Sun Empire from getting through. There is no way to see the beaten path to the northern company of Falcon's Nest. 4 figures move through the forest along the trees. Their bodies are shrouded in an unbearable cold. Their cloaks are developing in the wind. The unusually tall trees are about to fall under the weight of the snow. Their pale blue faces are so frozen that you can barely see the hot steam from their mouths. Blue noses are already beginning to freeze. The last of all is barely dragging her body and weaving slowly through her legs, Junior Sergeant Mint. She can no longer feel the fingers of her hands. Sergeant Mint turns to her warriors in a trembling voice and talks about how she is unbearably cold. After cheering her up and engaging in conversation, Sergeant Dom answers her, asking if this is her first time in the North. Indeed, Mint is too young, and this is the first time she has seen snow and felt such cold on her body. Sergeant Mint is already getting nervous, and words come out of her mouth that it is not for nothing that the Falcon's Nest warriors, who are so nasty, were sent here. But she doesn't understand why they are being punished so much. As cheerful and optimistic as ever, with a smile on his face, Lance Sergeant Varrock finds the upside of this assignment. After all, it will make them special warriors, for which they should be very thankful to the captain for this opportunity to stand out. Mint sees snow for the first time, but already realizes how much she hates it. And then he has a perfectly adequate question ripe for her to say out loud. She wonders what is so special about becoming a special warrior of the Sun Empire. Abruptly and with surprised looks at Mint, Sergeant Boki and Doma turn around. They clearly arrived in shock at such a question. They considered it inadequate. And such stupid questions should not be uttered by any warrior. And even the insanely positive Varrock got angry and asked the others not to say the answer to her stupid question, promising to teach her a lesson for asking such questions. Junior Sergeant Mint was so angry that she turned on her innocent child tantrum. Screaming, she demanded that she immediately tell her everything she didn't know about. But Boki wasn't even surprised by her antics. Sergeant Boki silently and sharply raised his hand in the air, thereby gagging Sergeant Mint. Seeing this gesture, she immediately fell silent, bulging her big eyes and opening her mouth. She was obeying a senior. The group of freezing warriors finally arrived at the Falcon Wing Company base. The castle stood in semi-darkness, shrouded in fog. Its emblem could be seen above the doors. The huge wooden doors seemed to be frozen shut. Falcon's Beak's squad, glad that they had finally ended this endless journey. They approached the huge doors of the castle to get warm there sooner rather than later. At the entrance, Boki's troop is stopped by two Falcon's Nest warriors. They block their way with long and sharp spears, asking questions about who they are and where they came from. Staff Sergeant Baki, with an unwavering and serious look, told them where they were from and who they were. Seryat Mint, as usual, looked out from behind Baki, shouted out why they were being impertinent to them and not letting them pass. Varrock stops her at the same second, grabbing her by the head like a small child. Boki holds out a paper to the two watchmen. They begin to stare at it intently and read it. The seriousness of their faces alarms the Falcon Beak warriors. Having finished reading, the two warriors reluctantly open the heavy wooden doors of the castle and invite them to enter with them. Demanding, "Follow them." They look back at them incredulously. Upon entering Falcon Wing Castle, the warriors, led by Sergeants Boki, begin to look around. Silently, they follow the warriors accompanying them. In this castle, everything looked different from Falcon's Beak base. Instead of tents, two-story wooden houses were built. This was due to the harsh climate of the area. Passing by these houses, the Falcon's Beak warriors felt the stares of the residents of this base. Strangers and visitors are obviously very rare here. Sergeant Boki is so attentive, without giving any facial expressions, stares unobtrusively at everyone. He studies the whole situation. Boki sees the Falcon Wing warriors in one of the houses watching their movements with great suspicion. Boki continues to study everything at every turn. As he moves further, he observes the following picture. The three warriors of the Falcon Wing begin to discuss them and laugh without hiding it, looking straight at them. They feel their superiority, thus showing who is in charge and they don't belong here. But Sergeant Boki and his team, with their unwavering movements and gazes, do not pay attention to such trifles. Finally, when they reach a structure, the warrior escorting them opens the doors. He invites them all to go inside and wait here on the spot. He tells them he will call the captain. The room is very warm. The sergeants immediately head towards the fireplace to warm themselves and thank the attendant for the welcome. Starting to warm up by the fireplace, Boki and Dana want to discuss this situation and the people in this castle. After waiting until no outsiders are around, they start talking. Sergeant Boki is the first to start the conversation, suggesting that he doesn't think they are welcome here at all. Junior Sergeant Mint, warming his icy hands by the fireplace fire, answers him by asking if he has noticed that too. It was written all over their faces that they wanted to fight and fight them hard, continued Mint. The fair and most calm and judicious Sergeant Dona suggested, replying to everyone that most likely they too absolutely disliked the idea of the squads operating together, as they considered themselves the best and strongest of all the squads in existence. As usual, the irascible and feisty Sergeant Mint began to grudgingly object. It certainly made her angry. Why on earth would they think so? Suddenly and abruptly, the door swings open. One can hear someone running quickly and shouting Sergeant Boki's name. A dark shadow of a female human appears on the threshold. Running into the room, she approaches Baki. With an enthusiastic, loving look in her eyes, she showers him with compliments about how happy she is to see him. This girl is very young, with shoulder-length red hair and a slender, beautiful figure. Sergeant Boki is clearly some kind of idol for her, someone she's longed to meet for a long time now. Suddenly, everyone in the room was surprised by her appearance. Standing on the threshold, she did not take her eyes off Boki. She staggered awkwardly and said with an innocent smile on her face that she'd only had 3 bottles of liquor. Sergeant Donna asked Boki in a whisper if he knew this strange drunken person, to which he immediately replied that he had no idea who she was. The red-haired girl came closer to Boki and held out her hand to him. The red-haired girl introduced herself as Captain Falcon Wing. Her name is Vivi. The unkempt appearance of some sloppy drunk girl shocked everyone. They didn't expect her to be the captain of the entire northern base as well. Captain Vivi's fumes wafted throughout the room, intoxicating everyone present. She didn't let go of Sergeant Boki's hand, saluted him with burning eyes, and expressed how nice it was to meet him, the war hero about whom so many rumors had been circulating. Captain Vivi pulled from the pocket of her figure-hugging pants the letter that Boki had given to the watchman. Barely reading it, clearly unable to do so normally, she began the conversation. Hiccuping from the alcohol she'd drunk, she began listing the people present in order. Boki, Donna, Varrock, and Mint stood in a row as if to be counted. They could no longer stand the kind of booze standing in the room. Stopping at Junior Sergeant Mint, Vivi shouted emotionally, showering her with compliments on what a cutie she was, puzzled as to who sent someone so small to war. Vivi even wanted to relieve her of that, but Mint replied to her that she was perfectly fine. Without the slightest hint of talking about the workflow, Captain Vivi wished for the North Beak warriors to head to the barracks to get some proper rest and strength, for they had traveled too long a distance. After ordering her warriors to escort the arrivals, Captain Vivi staggered away, hiccuping and hiccuping. Sergeant Donna was a little puzzled, thinking that they would stay in this barracks. Sergeant Varrock had developed a clear interest in Captain Vivi. He liked her, he even called her cute, not shying away from the Sun Empire warriors around him. It was already getting dark. After walking a few meters, the warriors led by Boki stopped when they saw the barracks they had been sent to. They were in such shock that none of them could utter a single word. It was a 2-story wooden building. Half of its roof was completely missing. Holes in it were filled with the same rotten boards. On the second floor, a hole the size of an entire window hadn't even been patched. The 2 warriors escorting them informed them with a smirk and even a laugh that there were no more barracks available for them. The sergeants of the Falcon's Beak Squad stood there in shock without saying a word. They did not know what to do, after all. No one wants to quarrel. They are guests. The 2 warriors moved away from the crumbling barracks and stood guard. Sergeant Mint was the first to open her mouth, unable to bear the humiliation. Gritting her teeth and furrowing her brow, she called them bloody bastards, glaring at them in their wake. Sergeant Varrock calmed Mint down as usual, explained to her that it was absolutely not worth it to give in to such childish provocations on their part, that she should be above it, for it was the Falcon's Beak sergeants who would become special warriors. Suddenly, the smiling, positive, and never sad Sergeant Varrock suddenly changed his face, the reason being a broken handle while trying to open the door. It was just left in his hand. The devil's anger filled Varrock's and Mint's bodies. The words came out of his mouth that it didn't matter who the special warriors were anymore. He wanted to finish them off here and now for treating them like this. Sergeant Mint was with him, backing him up. Sergeant Baki, trying to calm the enraged Varrock and Mint down, somehow said that they had no choice. They were guests and would make do with what they were given. Once inside the barracks, Sergeant Dana, as if nothing had happened, ordered Varrock and Mint to clean up the mess. After all, no one had ever lived in the barracks, and it was uninhabitable. Wishing the boys good luck, Sergeants Don and Baki hurried away. The clearly disgruntled junior sergeants, asking where they were going, received an answer that did not satisfy them but made them more angry. Sergeants Baki and Dana decided to take a walk and get some fresh air before going to bed. How shameless they are, thought Sergeant Mint unashamedly. The couple walked slowly and leisurely into the thick of the forest. The weather was quiet. The bright yellow moon illuminated them all the way. The snow was glistening from its rays. Sergeant Baki obviously didn't feel like it. He asked Dana when they were going back. Maybe the boys needed their help. But Dana didn't think one bit about it, saying the guys would be fine on their own in an hour. Pulling herself up and yawning from exhaustion, Sergeant Dana laughed, telling Boki that their soldiers' barracks cleaned in 10 minutes total. They laughed a bit, diluting the atmosphere with a cheerful note. Suddenly, Donna squinted her eyes, as if she wanted to see something in the distance. But she didn't realize what was there. As she got closer, she opened her eyes from such crazy surprise, even opening her mouth. Her eyes were glowing. They reached the precipice of the cliff. There was a beautiful view of nature from above. The pinkish lake with a forest around it gave a romantic setting. Sergeant Dana's glowing eyes were so honest, piercing. When they had traveled such a long way, there was a storm and such beauty was just physically impossible to see. Sergeant Boki was also delighted by such scenery. His eyes rejoiced, for it was not often that one saw such a thing. Sergeant Mint would have loved it, Dana thought aloud. Boki agreed and said he should bring her here. Sergeant Dana was so inspired by the colors of nature that she wanted to continue talking about something beautiful. She had such a kind and sincere smile on her face. She expected Baki to do the same. Sergeant Boki began to continue this conversation. Donna tells him how amazing everything has worked out in their lives. Looking into the distance, at the vast expanse of nature, a bright moon was hovering in the sky, illuminating like a lantern all around. After all, it seems that only yesterday they were cadets, and today they are so close to becoming special warriors of the Empire of the Sun. The warm conversation began to turn to friendly reminiscences of childhood. Sergeant Baki asked Dana not to get ahead of himself, because life is so unpredictable. You don't know how many degrees it can turn. Sergeant Baki looks at Dana and has a lot of faith in her, promising her that she will do well and become a truly special warrior because she has been working so hard for so long. Dana keeps up with the compliments and encourages Baki as well. She believes that he will definitely achieve this goal. He is already a legend after all. The whole continent knows about him, his bravery and his martial arts of fighting. For the first time in his life, Sergeant Boki is so embarrassed to say that Dana overestimates his abilities too much. He is humble and very smart, as no one has ever said such sincere compliments to him in so many years. Sergeant Dana closes her eyes. She tries to remember their childhood, for they have been together since they were little. Their friendship is sincere. They have been through too much. It seems that no one and nothing can change that. She keeps telling and reminding Boki about their childhood together, the funny moments, their studies, and various hardships. She vividly remembers his first day as a cadet, even remembers what he was wearing. Dana still remembers his body movements, what he was like as a boy then, remembers the unwavering will in his eyes and the determination that none of the other cadet boys had. He pursued a completely different goal. After all, most of the guys came to the cadets only for the sake of not starving and surviving. He didn't. Even then, Sergeant Donna realized that this boy would definitely achieve something great and huge. Sergeant Baki was suddenly a little wary of such stories from Dana. It seemed unobtrusively odd to him. Her behavior, her words. He asked her why she had decided to suddenly remember the past just now. To which Sergeant Donna answered him that they had great faith in him. He is their idol who will lead them all to something great. She goes on to speak for both Virak and Mint. They all consider him the favorite, and if they succeed in this operation, they will all become truly special warriors of the Empire of the Sun. With every word Dana said, Sergeant Balky was becoming more and more filled with anger and wild rage. After her words that having achieved everything they would have the honor of serving the Emperor himself. But Boki had a completely different goal in mind. His eyes began to water with blood, the blood of revenge. He will not back down from it. No one knows his true intentions, and no one is likely to find out. Sergeant Boki's teeth begin to grind, grinning like an animal of prey. The only word on his tongue is Emperor, Emperor. How he hates him, dreaming of ending him once and for all. Not seeing or hearing any response from Baki, Sergeant Dana interrogates him about the fact that they came to fight together only for this purpose. So this opportunity that Captain Doramite has given them, they can't miss it. This is their fateful chance to do what they want to do, what they dreamed of as children. Sergeant Boki exhaled, trying to calm down and get his breathing even. Lest Donna suspect anything about his face and demeanor, he replied that she was absolutely right. They must do everything in their power. After all, there will never be a second chance like this. It's now or never. Not every squad will be given such opportunities. The moon, shining and hovering in the sky, had already disappeared behind the night clouds. A deep and dark night was falling. They stood motionless, still talking, and it seemed like more than an hour had passed. Sergeant Dana was thinking about something. Her gaze changed and became mysterious. She was trying to ask Sergeant Boki something. She noticed the sadness in his face, trying to see if she could get a glimpse of him. Finally, Dana decided to ask Boki something. She was very interested in one question. So cautiously and carefully she began to ask if he had unexpectedly, the end of their conversation and walk is broken by an unknown man flying with a sword. He crept up quietly and stealthily from behind. Even the crunch of snow did not give away his intentions. The point of the unknown assailant's sword flies straight into Sergeant Dana's neck. She unsuspectingly tries to continue the conversation. The attacker was a short man of short stature wearing a gray cloak. His face was covered by a deep gray hood. Who he was and why he was doing this was unknown. Quickly and skillfully, Sergeant Balky hears someone's footsteps in the snow, manages to copulate and push Sergeant Dana away with one hand. He professionally grabs the blade of his opponent's sword with one hand. His face is visible, or rather just his appearance, as he is wearing an unpleasant-looking mask on his face. Sergeant Boki starts shouting in his face who he is and what he wants from them, but he gets no answer. He has to consider his next course of action. Sergeant Boki realizes that he's never met an enemy in this form before. His mask was cold-blooded, emotionless. It seemed to be made of steel and even chained to his face with intent, faceless. While Boki tries to think of a plan of further action, holding his opponent's sword with his hand, another similar opponent appears on the horizon and begins to swing his sword, attacking Boki. The sergeant takes a second to dodge the blow. The enemy's sword cuts through his cloak but doesn't hit his body. Their fighting technique is professional, and Boki realizes that there is no way around it without a fight here. He grasps his fire sword with his right hand. His techniques and skills are not like the others. He's very fast and cunning in battle. Taking out his sword, Sergeant Boki immediately uses his first skill, the skill Crescent Moon Slash. Turning 360 degrees, he swings his sword, leaving a field of fire around him. After destroying 2 opponents, Boki sees a dozen more of the same masked men appear from behind the trees. But they don't start attacking yet, they just watch what is happening. One of them is standing in front of the others. It's probably the commander-in-chief. He's obviously up to something, but he's not giving any orders. He's probably watching Sergeant Boki's fighting technique. Sergeant Baki, sword in hand, frantically searches for Sergeant Dana with his eyes, finds her and shouts to her how she is if she is all right, but he hears no response from her. Baki becomes even more restless without Dana's answer. Dana sits on her knees with her head down to the ground and holding tightly to his left shoulder. He immediately runs to her. As he approaches Sergeant Dana, Boki sees a pool of blood on the white snow. It won't stop flowing and has no time to soak into the snow. Donna is very badly wounded. Sergeant Dana regains consciousness and lifts herself up a little. She apologizes to Sergeant Bucky for letting her guard down and letting him down. Dana continues to unravel her girlish modesty and says she is very ashamed of it. She lowers her head in front of Sergeant Bucky, but Bucky doesn't care. The important thing is that she's okay and alive. Sergeant Bucky shouts her name, thus showing her to come to her senses and pull herself together at last. The third faceless enemy flies at them again. Bucky fends off the faceless enemy with his flaming sword. The dozen or so warriors standing nearby continue to watch the scene, sending Bucky to attack one at a time. He realizes that he needs to show these brazen opponents all his skills. Sergeant Dana does not change her position. She is exhausted. Too much blood has been lost. Sergeant Bucky turns on the ignition of his flaming sword, the hand of flame. Lightning fast, the fire from it covers several meters around, setting even the snow on fire. The fire consumes several enemy warriors, hitting the spear of the commander-in-chief. He stares in bewilderment at what is happening. Even through his mask, his wariness was evident. He involuntarily begins to look at his wooden spear, from which smoke from the extinguished flames is coming off. In his mind, he wondered if it was a rune sword. He recognizes it. Sergeant Bucky has finished the confrontation. He peers into the forest and realizes he didn't notice the faceless ones until they came closer to him, and Dana. He suspected Falcon Wing warriors but discarded those thoughts, as the warriors do not have such abilities, and there is no reason for them to attack them. There's only one possibility, that these are the warriors whose state was destroyed by the Empire of the Sun, and they tracked them and Dana down and decided to take revenge. Suddenly, the commander-in-chief of the enemy warriors interrupted Sergeant Bucky's musings, saying that he could hear his thoughts going through his head. Bucky is shocked to find out who this man is who can read his thoughts, although it could just be a ruse. The commander-in-chief tells Bucky not to bother with such thoughts because it doesn't matter anymore. He tells him that they are only here to finish him off. Sergeant Bucky becomes even angrier. His eyes are filled with hatred and anger. He is ready to destroy whoever takes his life. He assumes a fighting stance. He has no intention of continuing this pointless conversation. He needs to keep himself and Dana alive. In a hoarse voice, barely audible to Bucky, Sergeant Dana also tells him that the commander-in-chief is right. There is no point in bothering to think about who they are. Dana was already lying completely on the cold snow. Sergeant Bucky begins the battle. He shouts out with all his might that he will destroy every last one of them. He turns on his second skill of the rune sword. Just like the last battle to capture the castle where he had concrete slabs cracking, the same thing was happening here. The snow was beginning to melt under his feet from the heat that came from the flaming sword. Flame play. Sergeant Bucky begins his attack. He takes aim at the commander-in-chief, but he is clearly very professional and takes cover from the fire. The warriors standing nearby are killed. They clearly hadn't seen such abilities in combat as Sergeant Bucky's before. In fact, his abilities were supernatural. Bucky destroyed everyone in his path without even thinking. It was in his blood. For his true purpose, he must survive. The commander-in-chief and one of his warriors remained. Sergeant Bucky continued to burn everything around him with his flaming sword. He didn't even move, as Donna was lying next to him, no longer showing signs of life. Sergeant Bucky heads into a frontal attack on the faceless warrior. Face to face, they glare at each other. But the enemy doesn't stand a chance against Bucky. He swings his rune sword in a second and destroys his opponent without the right to survive. Sergeant Bucky realizes that there is now only one commander-in-chief left. All his warriors have already been dealt with by Bucky. They stand opposite each other and wait to see who will make the first move. But then something strange happens. Bucky's sergeant looks at the enemy commander-in-chief in bewilderment and utter shock. Everything around him is lit up in an icy blue color. It is as if there is a confrontation between ice and flame. Sergeant Bucky has never seen anything like this before. They're facing each other. The enemy aims his long thunder spear at Baki. He in turn swings his flaming sword. Finally, the commander-in-chief ignites his thunder lance, and the light from it illuminates everything around him. A crushing is taking place. The brightness of the blue color is so strong that nothing can be seen. The supernatural strike is heading straight for Sergeant Boki. A blue flame is seen on Sergeant Boki's face. He waits for it, taking the enemy's blow completely on himself. Cleaning up in the barracks is finished. Junior Sergeant Varrock is rearranging wooden boxes of unwanted found items. Suddenly Varrock looks out the window and asks Sergeant Mint if she has heard any strange noises. Mint turns to Varrock and says she hasn't heard anything. Varrock continues to stare thoughtfully out the window and says it sounded like some kind of explosion. He asks Mint if he should check to see what it was, but Sergeant Mint laughs that it sounds like he just imagined it. The irascible Mint changes her face and threatens Varrock, telling him that if he dares to leave her here alone now, she will beat him to death. Varrock smiles. Sergeant Varrock continues to stare out the window with his arms folded. He finds the explosion too suspicious. He obviously heard it. Okay, he thinks, and tells Mint to finish cleaning up quickly because the staff sergeants are about to return. On the battlefield after the Faceless One's blow, a bulky sergeant is on his knees holding his sword. His clothes are torn and his body is bleeding. The blow was not weak, but the important thing is that he's alive. Sergeant Boki looks at his sword, or rather at the mana that glows within it. This is the mana that gives power to the rune sword. Suddenly the mana begins to slowly fade away, crumbling into shards. Boki realizes that he has used up all the mana stored in the runes. His enemy stands as if nothing has happened. Holding his spear, he looks at Sergeant Boki and waits for him to strike back. Boki realizes that his enemy is skilled in magic and he is very powerful. Boki's inner voice encourages him. He thinks about the fact that he was able to defeat everyone and will certainly cope with the last one without the help of runes. Unexpectedly for him is the next picture. He just gathered his thoughts and his power to attack the last one. As someone began to rise from the ground, leaning on his sword, one by one the enemy warriors defeated by Sergeant Boki begin to get up from the ground. It was as if they were coming to life. Sergeant Boki is puzzled as to what is happening. His eyes are rounded with shock. Everyone, absolutely everyone, is getting back on their feet as if nothing had happened. They were just lying there with no signs of life, Boki thinks to himself. How can this be? What kind of magic is this? Boki is at a complete loss. As their opponents begin to get to their feet, green stones glow in their hearts through their clothes. Sergeant Boki knows they are runes of life restoration. He always thought and was sure that only followers of the Empire of the Sun could use the restoration runes. So there's still a lot Boki doesn't know. So who are they? There were so many unanswered questions in his mind. Holding onto a green glowing stone, one of the warriors tells Boki that he won't be able to defeat them all a second time. They begin their attack on Boki again. Sergeant Boki himself realizes that he really can't do it alone a second time. His mana has run out. Now he has no more magic. Surrounding Boki, the enemy warriors begin to attack. They fly up simultaneously from all sides and strike at him with their sharp swords. Sergeant Boki is staggered. He can't even raise his hands with his sword to defend himself. Several of the enemy warriors ignite their swords. They begin to glow with a bright white light. They continue to strike Boki, knocking him to the side from the force of the blows. The movements of the enemy warriors are very professional. Sergeant Boki has never encountered them in battle. Who are they? Where did they come from? The sergeant is at a loss. He is beginning to feel defeated, but he doesn't want to give up at all. Boki realizes that this is a skill of receiving sword aura, a skill of the warriors of the Sun Empire. How did they master all of this? The ignition of the enemy warriors' swords continues again. With so much power that it covers the entire forest, all the trees with light, it seems like the sword aura is about to destroy everything in the area. Sergeant Boki swings away from these magical blows as much as his strength allows him, which is already running low. He wipes the blood from his face. coming up with a plan as he goes. He has no intention of giving up, no intention of dying just like that. He needs to figure out who they are to defeat them, but he doesn't know that. Runes, magic, plus these enemy warriors are no stranger to flawless weaponry. Boki doesn't stop and continues to study the enemy. Boki has already accepted the fact that he can't do it alone. He has to think of a plan of action. The only option is the help of Sergeant Dana. He looks back at her. Boki looks at her motionless body, but sees that she's still alive. Steam is barely coming out of her mouth. Boki tells her that there is no more time, and if they don't take some action now, their lives will end here and now. Sergeant Dana is silent, not responding in any way. She's probably unconscious. Then Sergeant Boki takes Dana's sword and asks her to help him very much. After all, every warrior of the Empire of the Sun has his own sword, and no one but he can use it. It's worth a try, Sergeant Boki thinks to himself. They have no other choice. Her sword is full of mana. He says the word ignition. It might work. He hopes so. The enemy commander-in-chief aims his spear at Sergeant Boki and tells him to prepare to catch a blow from it and die. He's sure he's done with him now. The battle is at an end. But suddenly the ignition of Dana's sword in Boki's hand suddenly works. The rune sword is engulfed in flames. It is the only and last chance. The opponents are horrified at how Boki managed it. Sergeant Boki was filled with tremendous power thanks to Dana's sword. Boki jumped so high that the enemies lost sight of him. He swung his weapon and prepared to attack with his maximally charged sword. Sergeant Boki's third skill is Lightning Strike. This skill can destroy a dozen enemies at a time. The enemy warriors are illuminated by a fiery light. Their eyes see nothing around them but it. They are preparing to receive Boki's fateful strike. The sky is bathed in a bright orange light as if the sun is now rising. Sparks of fire engulf the trees around them. An incredibly powerful blow strikes the enemy warriors. They fall without a sign of life for the second time. The Faceless One's commander-in-chief is in awe of his power. He didn't expect this from Boki. He had heard of him, but never suspected such incredible power and firepower. Sergeant Boki destroyed everything around him for several dozen meters. No snow, no trees. A deep pit had formed around his axis, and he was in the center of it. No mere mortal could resist such power. That's what the enemy warriors thought. The commander-in-chief of the Faceless Ones observes the scene. In his head, he scrolls through his thoughts. There are enough of them to think about. He pondered, calculating such a blow from Boki, glanced at his sword and realized that it had used up all the mana of the rune. Relieved that Sergeant Boki had wasted all of his comrades' rune, he didn't destroy them all. He aimed at Sergeant Boki, loaded his long wooden spear and wished him a good road to hell. But Boki is very calm for some reason. His eyes tell him that it's not over yet. The sergeant begins to smile, some cunning plan he's come up with. "It worked," he shouted to the commander-in-chief, at which the enemy stopped, not understanding what Sergeant Boki was talking about. He expects an answer from him, but Boki's stalling him. And for good reason. Behind the commander-in-chief, a fireball forms, flying straight at his back. The martial art of the flaming sword is the second skill of Staff Sergeant Mint. The game of flames begins. The commander-in-chief does not have time to react to the blow to his back from Sergeant Mint. He is engulfed by the flames of the Sun Empire warrior's fireball. This was Sergeant Boki's cunning plan. Lance Sergeants Varrock and Mint immediately run to Boki and ask how he is feeling, if he is all right. The still-living commander-in-chief is terrified and tries to put things into perspective. He realizes that this superpowered attack was only to call his comrades here for help. The plan worked perfectly. Boki is pleased with himself and his comrades. They brought all the runes they had, for the situation looks quite serious. The warriors of the Empire of the Sun immediately insert the runes into their flaming swords. They are full of mana energy and immediately ignite with bright sun flames. Sergeant Boki applies the flame hand skill, igniting his sword further to launch an attack on the enemy. His eyes are full of enthusiasm and confidence that victory is theirs. There is no doubt now. There are only a few faceless opponents left, led by the commander-in-chief. The warriors of the Empire of the Sun cannot let their guard down. Dana is wounded, which means there are already 3 of them left in the fight. Enemies are able to use runes and have magic, explains to Sergeant Boki. So there is no need to delay, and we must finish the enemies as soon as possible. Junior Sergeant Mint pulls her body from fatigue and involuntarily winces. She is tired. They finally finished cleaning up. They did a good job. The barracks was shining. But then, Mint, as usual, couldn't get over the fact that they were put in such a run-down barracks. They had not been welcomed at all, having been housed here. Sergeant Varrock told her that even though they were from the same empire, they were also competitors to become special warriors. Mint still doesn't understand or know what's so special about becoming special warriors, and yet Sergeant Varrock decided to explain to her what it means. After all, she should already be aware of it. He told her that these warriors are made every year by those who have done well in battle. It is the dream of every warrior from a young age. And what's more, the title of Special Warrior is bestowed by the Emperor himself. Sergeant Mint cried out in surprise. She didn't even know about this. She thought that it was impossible to meet the Emperor himself. It was quite possible. Sergeant Varrock laughed at Mint's girlish reaction. Now she understood why everyone wanted to become special warriors. Suddenly, Sergeant Varrock interrupts his conversation with Mint and looks back out the window. He heard something again, but the noise was much stronger than last time. His eyes are blinded by the very bright light in the window. The 2 of them run to the window and see a bright fire flashing on the horizon above the trees. Sergeant Mint was at a loss for words, uttering only single words with no reference. Sergeant Varrock immediately realized what was happening and immediately ordered her to carry all of her equipment. The fight between the 3 Sun Empire warriors and the unknown faceless warriors wearing identical masks continued. Sergeant Varrock asks Boki if Sergeant Dana is badly wounded. Sergeant Boki doesn't know how she is. The wound on her body is not deep, but she is unconscious. Boki immediately thought about something. A thought occurred to him. He hypothesized that there might have been some kind of poison on the point of the sword that had poisoned Dana. Sergeant Varrock is questioning Boki about their enemy. They need to know everything that was here and act together to defeat the enemy. Boki explains to them everything he's learned. The first is that in the middle stands their main leader. He stores power in his spear and then shoots it out. Boki suggests that while he restores his mana in his spear, then we can deal with the others. Eventually the plan is constructed. The sergeants have distributed all the enemies amongst themselves. Sergeant Boki charges his flaming sword to begin his attack on the enemy. But no such luck. He senses someone approaching from behind where Sergeant Dana was lying. Dana begins to glow green. Someone begins to heal her, restoring her powers. Everyone turns towards Sergeant Dana. They see a picture of Captain Falcon Wing treating her. "Enough! The fight is over," says Captain Vivi. The sergeants stand in silence. The sergeants of the Falcon Beak squad, eyes bulging, can't believe it. Vivi herself is using recovery magic. Captain Vivi's finished with her treatment, but the effects of the poison will last for some time. So cheerful and most likely intoxicated, Vivi brags that her recovery magic is the best in the entire Empire of the Sun. To Sergeant Boki, she says they did a great job with the inspection, and his cunning plan to call in his comrades was excellent. Sergeant Varrock runs up to Dana to help her up. When asked how she is feeling, he receives silence in response. The poison paralyzes the body. Sergeant Boki is very angry. After all, at first he had the idea that they were Falcon Wing men, but he discarded it immediately, because he didn't appreciate their power. He asks who they are, these faceless masked men, to which he gets an answer from the smiling Vivi. She will introduce them. The warriors begin to remove their masks one by one. Vivi explains that they are her warriors, chosen for a joint operation. The supposed enemy commander-in-chief introduces himself as Sergeant Posh, 4th Platoon Sergeant, 1st Squad Falcon Wing. He begins to taunt the Falcon's Beak warriors. It's funny to him that there's no one better than the very war hero of the West. Poch continues to reprimand them, chiding Baki for not carrying a spare weapon, and Dana falls from a single blow. In the end, Sergeant Potch calls it a total disgrace to be on a joint operation with the likes of them. Sergeant Mint can't take the abuse and starts shouting about what he's doing. This is no longer a physical battlefield, but a battlefield of tongues. Who will hurt who more with their insults? Captain Vivi orders them to stop. Vivi asks Boki to understand them because they're all so funny with amazing powers. But the characters are a mess. Sergeant Mint still can't calm down, accusing the Falcon Wing warriors of sneaking around. Sassy Mint went on to say that if they were at war now, they would die by her hand. Sergeant Verok's hand lays on Mint's shoulder and tries to calm her down, but she doesn't stop, saying that Falcon Wing is a disgrace to the entire Sun Empire. On the side of the Falcon Wing warriors, one warrior begins to unmask. It was Falcon Wing's junior Sergeant Farron, a tall, long-haired girl. She starts accusing Sergeant Mint of tarnishing the honor of their entire family, and she should keep her mouth shut. Sergeant Mint is clearly in shock. She shouts Farron's name and asks what she's doing here. Boki picks up the conversation, turning to Mint to ask her how she knows this Farron. But it wasn't hard to guess that they were most likely sisters. They both had the same greenish sparse hair color. Captain Vivi stops this family conversation, smiling and laughing. He then orders the others to join in. Suddenly, the rest of the warriors began to appear from everywhere. Sergeant Baki, puzzled, abruptly begins to turn in different directions. Warriors from the other squads descend from the trees. Continuing, Captain Vivi explains to everyone that from this point on, everyone is united into one Special Forces platoon. She introduces each warrior starting with the eastern squad of Falcon Tail. There are 3 sergeants, so everyone can recognize each other as brothers and sisters in arms. Next comes the red-haired sergeant of the Southern Company of Falcon's Claw. The only ones who didn't know anything about what was going on were the Falcon's Nest squad. Sergeant Baki didn't even suspect or notice that all these warriors were hiding throughout the battle. They are considered representative squads. Continuing, Captain Vivi warns all the warriors that before she explains the full nature of the operation, they must understand. It is classified. Her voice became harder and rougher. If any information leaks out, they will all face the death penalty. Sergeants Mint and Boki are listening intently, but they haven't let go of the battle situation yet. Tired and exhausted, they want to end it all as soon as possible. Vivi starts to tell the secret mission for the platoon. The place of first action is a snowy kingdom called Ekatur. The mission is to cross the Wailing Wall, the front line of the kingdom of Ekathur. Even her warriors didn't know about this mission. Sergeant Pak interrogates the captain about the Wailing Wall. He obviously knows something about it. Captain Vivi answers Sergeant Pak's question with a nod, closing his eyes. It is that fortress of indestructible material. It is one of Master Hephaestus's last masterpieces. Wary of this assignment, Sergeant Pak asks Vivi that this is the same fortress that the Sun Empire has been unable to overcome for over 6 months now. He doesn't believe it, doesn't believe they can do it this time. Captain Falcon Wing agrees with him completely on that score. But still, anything is possible, she explains. They'll send a commander from upstairs who has a plan. Who will be sent as platoon commander for this operation, no one knows yet. Private Syria of Falcon Wing asks Captain Vivi why she won't be in charge of the operation. Vivi replies to her that her task is different. She will be in charge of a special platoon. She made no secret of who will be the commander of the entire special operation. It will be the Great Sunblood. The Emperor of the Sun Empire himself personally appointed him as the commander of this special operation. The warriors of the Falcon Wing Squadron could not contain their emotions and began to question their captain. Sergeant Kido of the Falcon Tail Squad even put his hand to his open mouth in excitement. Falcon Claw Sergeant Jarek was clearly very pleased with the honor. The sergeants of the Falcon's Nest Squad were also in wild shock. Boki's face turned pale when he heard the word Emperor. The rounded eyes spoke not of the shock that the others felt about the Blood Sun, but of his revenge. The whites of his eyes were beginning to turn red with rage and anger. Sergeant Boki was clearly familiar with this commander. A picture stood before his eyes. His crying little brother in tears and barefoot in the middle of a village engulfed in flames. Sergeant Baki begins to bite his lips and grind his teeth. His cheekbones begin to at least move, thus showing his anger and nervousness. The veins in his face swelled so badly, the blood was boiling in them, and his gaze was so fierce that he looked like he was going to explode. The blood of the sun is not a man but a great being in human form. He is worthy of all praise and greatness to rule over all. He is worshipped, for he was created by the fiery red falcon. He was created by the power of the sun. No one has even seen his face. The sergeants of the Falcon's Nest are gathered together and discuss him over cups of tea. Sergeant Mint is so defeated and enthusiastic that she starts talking about him. Positive Sergeant Varrock asks Mint why she's so nervous. Mint has finally realized the seriousness of this special operation, although Varrock himself is walking on eggshells. Boki and Donna, who are standing aside, watch their conversation. Everyone is very excited. The Emperor himself has never appointed commanders, and now he's done it, so it's very serious. Sergeant Dana asks Baki on a friendly note what he thinks about the operation. Boki sighs, squinting his eyes, taking a sip of tea. He told her that he didn't know what to think about it, but he hopes very much that the weeping wall will fall under the power of the sun, and they'll get through it all. Dana continues to talk. She doesn't understand how they will get through with such a small platoon, because the night order is pretty strong. There are too many of them and they are outnumbered. It's also very strange that the operation is secret, which could very well democratize the enemy. Sergeant Boki agrees with her words and also realizes that there are too many unanswered questions. They are obliged to rely on the commander. After all, everything is for a reason. He clearly has a plan. Sergeant Boki thought for a moment. They stood in silence, drinking tea and thinking about all this. They are soldiers, and their only and most important task is to follow the orders of their superior officer. Sergeant Dana laughed. She recognizes the same Baki. He is in his repertoire. Abruptly, interrupting their conversation, the door opens and the room becomes unusually cold. A falcon wing warrior appears on the doorstep and informs them that their captain is calling them to formation. Sergeant Mint is up to her old tricks, snapping that it's unbearably cold outside. Varrock tries to shut her up as usual. Dana laughs at this pair of junior sergeants. They always make everyone laugh. Orders have been taken. We need to pack up, said Dana. Dana smiled and made a joke about having to freeze their snot off in the cold again. Sergeant Boki thought about it. He had been up all night trying to replay the platoon's actions and how the operation would go. Everyone gathered at the squad meeting. Captain Vicky started off on a positive note to welcome everyone. As she said yesterday, today will begin the competition to divide into groups for the operation. The Special Operation Platoon will be divided into 2 people per group. To understand the combat capabilities of each warrior, that is the purpose of the competition. Captain Vivi begins dividing up the squads. First she names Falcon Beak and Falcon Claw. The sergeants of Falcon Beak were not surprised by anything. They didn't care who they were competing with. However, the Falcon Claw warriors were clearly unhappy with this definition. Falcon Claw Seryan asks Vivi to compete with Falcon Wing because Falcon Beak is very weak to him. But Captain Vivi quashes this idea by denying this request. Everything was already determined beforehand. Lance Sergeant Mint succumbs to this provocation, calling this sergeant a short-sighted wit. Sergeant Falcon Claw was saddened at all, saying that it was a pity that it was impossible to change the opponent in the competition. With a cheeky grin, Sergeant Falcon Claw is happy to compete with old comrades. Sergeant Jarek was clearly angry. Potch calmed him down by asking him not to be provoked. He advised him to use this fight as a good opportunity to prove himself. The angry face with the scar on his forehead showed his superiority over everyone else. The warriors of the Falcon's Beak squad watched their relationship with interest. It looked like it was clearly not going to work out. It was very intense. Sergeant Dana politely asked the captain how they would fight the Falcon's Claw warriors, since they were not equal in numbers.